I was 13 years old when my parents decided I was no longer part of their future. They didn't argue with me. They didn't explain anything. They didn't even say goodbye. They just disappeared. It happened during winter. The house felt unusually quiet that morning, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I remember walking into the kitchen, expecting to see my mother making breakfast or my father reading the newspaper. Instead, there was nothing, no voices, no movement. Just a cold room and a ticking clock. At first, I thought they had gone out for groceries. Then I noticed their suitcases were gone. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. Be good. We'll talk later? That was it. No address, no explanation, no return date. I stood there staring at the screen, trying to understand what later meant. An hour passed. Then 2. Then an entire day. No plows. No replies. That night, the house felt bigger than it ever had before. Every sound made me jump. The heater stopped working. And the cold slowly crept into every room. I wrapped myself in blankets and tried to sleep, telling myself they'd be back in the morning. They weren't. Day 2 was worse. I ran out of proper food. I ate whatever I could find: dry cereal, leftover bread, cold soup from a can. I didn't know how to cook. I didn't know how to fix the heater. I didn't even know how long I was supposed to wait before asking for help. I was scared, but more than that, I was confused. On the 3rd day, neighbors noticed something was wrong. One of them asked where my parents were. I lied and said they were traveling. Saying the truth felt too embarrassing. Like admitting I wasn't wanted. That night, the electricity went out. I sat in the dark, hugging my knees, listening to my own breathing. That was the moment it finally hit me. They had left me behind on purpose. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. Something inside me just went quiet. Then, late that evening, headlights flashed through the window. A car pulled into the driveway, slow, confident, expensive. For a brief second, a childish hope rose in my chest. Maybe they had come back. Maybe this was all a mistake. But when the door opened, it wasn't my parents. It was my uncle. I had only seen him a few times in my life, at weddings, at funerals, always standing apart from everyone else. People whispered about him. They said he was rich, powerful, cold, dangerous. He stepped inside the house and looked around. The darkness, the cold, the emptiness. Then he looked at me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He simply said, "They left you." It wasn't a question. I nodded. He checked his watch. Then looked back at me and said, "Pack a bag. Essentials only." "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Somewhere you won't be abandoned," he replied. I ran upstairs and packed quickly. Clothes, school books. Nothing sentimental. I didn't take any family photos. They didn't feel like mine anymore. As I stepped outside, I took one last look at the house I grew up in. It no longer felt like home. It felt like proof. Proof that love could disappear without warning. As the car pulled away, I didn't know what waited for me ahead. But I knew one thing for sure. The child my parents left behind was not the person who would come back. Moving into my uncle's house felt like stepping into another world. It wasn't warm or welcoming. There were no family photos on the walls, no soft furniture. No signs that anyone lived there for comfort. Everything was sharp, clean, and perfectly organized. The house didn't feel like a home. It felt like a headquarters. My uncle didn't give me a tour. He pointed down a hallway and said, "That room is yours. Dinner is at 7, be on time." That was it. The first few weeks were the hardest. I barely spoke. I didn't know the rules and I was terrified of breaking them. I ate quietly, cleaned my plate, and went back to my room. No one asked how school was. No one asked how I was feeling. Strangely, I wasn't even sure I wanted them to. One night, I finally asked him a question. "Why did you take me in?" He didn't answer right away. He kept reading his papers, calm and focused. Then he said, "Because no one else did." That answer stayed with me. My uncle wasn't cruel. But he wasn't kind either. He never raised his voice. He never comforted me. Instead, he observed me like I was a problem he hadn't solved yet. At first, that made me uncomfortable. Over time it made me stronger. He believed emotions were distractions. "Feelings pass," he once said. "Skills stay." Every evening after dinner, he would call me into his study. He'd slide documents across the table. Contracts, blueprints, business reports. I didn't understand most of them at first, but he never explained twice. "Read," he said. "Then tell me what's wrong." I learned to pay attention. Not just to words but to patterns. Who benefited, who lost? Who was lying? Slowly I stopped feeling like a lost child and started feeling like a student. At school, teachers noticed the change. I spoke less but listened more. While other kids argued, I watched. While they chased attention, I learned patience. I had already learned what it felt like to be invisible. And now I knew how powerful that could be. One evening, my uncle caught me standing quietly in the corner of his office, watching him work. Instead of telling me to leave, he said something unexpected. "You think being unnoticed makes you weak," he said. "It doesn't. It makes you dangerous." That was the first time he ever praised me. He didn't give me toys or gifts. He gave me responsibility. I learned how to manage schedules, how to calculate costs, how to negotiate without raising my voice. He taught me that power didn't need to shout. Months passed. Then years. The house never got warmer, but I did. Not emotionally, strategically. I learned to protect myself without walls. I learned that control wasn't about force, it was about preparation. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about my parents. I wondered if they ever missed me. If they felt guilty. But those thoughts slowly faded. They belonged to the past, and my uncle taught me something very important. Looking back wastes energy, he said. Use it to build forward. By the time I turned 16, I was no longer afraid of silence. I understood it. Silence gave me space to think. To plan. I wasn't healing, I was transforming, and my uncle knew it. One night, as he watched me analyze a complex document without help, he gave a small nod, not a smile. Just a nod. That nod meant more to me than any apology ever could. Because for the first time since I was abandoned, someone wasn't looking at me with pity. They were looking at me with expectation. I was 20 years old when I learned the truth about my family. Not the version they told the world, but the version hidden behind smiles, vacations, and polite lies. It happened accidentally, or at least, that's what my uncle claimed. One evening, I was organizing old financial files in his study. Most of them were boring invoices, permits, contracts. Then I found a folder with my family's last name printed on the tab. My hands froze. Inside were bank statements, legal notices, and signed agreements. Large numbers jumped off the page. Money had been transferred, moved, hidden. And every document pointed back to my parents. When I confronted my uncle, he didn't look surprised. He didn't even look angry. He just leaned back in his chair and watched me process the information. "They didn't just abandon you," he said calmly. "They ran. From debt. From consequences, from me." Years ago, my parents had borrowed millions from my uncle to invest in a business they didn't understand. When it failed, they panicked. Instead of taking responsibility, they disappeared, taking what they could and leaving behind a mess. And I was collateral damage. I felt something twist inside my chest. Not sadness, not anger, something colder, clearer. "So you took me in because of them?" I asked. My uncle shook his head. "No. I took you in because of you." He told me the truth. He had been watching me since the night he picked me up from that freezing house. He wasn't testing my obedience. He was measuring my awareness. "Most people break after betrayal," he said. "A few sharpen." That night, I finally understood why he trained me the way he did. He wasn't raising a child. He was preparing a successor. From that moment on, my education changed. He started including me in real meetings, not as a student, but as an observer. I sat quietly while powerful people talked around me, unaware I was learning their weaknesses. I noticed who avoided eye contact, who rushed decisions, who lied too smoothly. I learned that truth doesn't hide well, people do. Meanwhile, my parents continued to live their fake, perfect lives. Social media posts, luxury trips, smiling family photos. They never mentioned me. It was like I had never existed. And strangely, I was grateful. Their silence gave me time. Time to grow without interference. Time to build without distraction. Time to become someone they wouldn't recognize. One night, my uncle asked me a question that changed everything. If they came back tomorrow, he asked, "What would you do?" I thought carefully before answering. "I wouldn't confront them," I said. "I'd wait." He smiled. A thin, sharp smile. "That," he said, "is the correct answer. He explained that revenge wasn't about anger or destruction. It was about positioning. About letting people reveal themselves while you controlled the environment. That's when I stopped thinking of my past as a wound. It was leverage. By the time I finished university, I wasn't just educated, I was calculated. I understood systems, power, and patience. I understood that the people who abandoned me were living on borrowed time. They thought they had escaped consequences. They were wrong. Very wrong. Because 15 years earlier, they had thrown away a child. And in doing so, they unknowingly created the person who would one day decide their future. 15 years passed quietly, but not slowly. While the world saw my uncle as a ruthless businessman, I saw him as a man preparing his final move. His health began to decline. But his mind remained sharp. He didn't talk about death in emotional terms. He talked about it like a transaction, planned, controlled, and final. One evening, he called me into his study. The room smelled of old books and cold air. He slid a sealed envelope across the desk toward me. "Do not open this," he said. "Not yet." "What is it?" I asked. "The future," he replied. He explained that when he was gone, people from his past would return, especially my parents. Not because they cared, but because they remembered what he owned. "They will look at you," he said, "and see nothing." That didn't offend me, it prepared me. 2 months later, my uncle passed away peacefully before dawn. No dramatic hospital scenes, no regrets, just silence. I didn't cry, I handled arrangements. I called lawyers, I secured assets. I locked doors, physically and legally. By the time the world learned of his death, everything was already in motion. The funeral was small and private. Or at least it was supposed to be. Minutes before the service began, luxury cars rolled in. My parents stepped out dressed in black designer clothing. Their grief perfectly rehearsed. My siblings followed, whispering and scanning the area like tourists. They walked past me without recognition. To them, I was staff. At the graveside I stood quietly, dressed in a sharp suit, listening as they spoke softly about family and loss. My mother cried loudly enough for others to notice. My father shook hands, accepting sympathy like a performance. They were mourning money, not a man. After the service, they approached me. "We'll handle things from here," my mother said, placing a gloved hand on my arm. "You've done enough." I almost smiled. They asked about the house, the accounts, the will. They assumed everything would fall into place, into their hands. I told them the reading would be held the next day at the law firm. That night, I slept peacefully. The next morning, we sat across from each other at a long polished table. My parents on one side. My siblings beside them. Me alone on the other. The lawyer began to read. Every sentence tightened the air. "The company shares, mine. The properties, mine. The controlling interest, mine." Silence followed. Then panic. My mother's face drained of color. My father leaned forward, angry and confused. My siblings whispered frantically. Finally, my father looked at me and said, "This isn't right." That's when I spoke. "It is," I said calmly. "I've been running parts of the business for years." Their eyes widened. In that moment, they didn't see their abandoned child anymore. They saw a stranger, a powerful one. And for the first time in 15 years, they understood something terrible. They were no longer in control. The room stayed silent after the will was read. No one moved. No one spoke. My parents sat frozen, staring at the lawyer as if he had made a mistake. My siblings avoided eye contact, suddenly unsure of their place in the world. The future they had imagined, easy money, inherited comfort, had collapsed in seconds. Finally, my mother broke the silence. "This must be some kind of misunderstanding," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Families don't work like this." I looked at her calmly. "Mine didn't," I replied. That was when they realized something even more frightening than losing the inheritance. They had lost authority over me. Over the next few weeks, reality set in. The businesses my uncle owned weren't just symbols of wealth, they were complex machines that required leadership. Employees needed direction, contracts needed signatures, and all of it went through me. My parents tried everything. First came guilt. They called late at night, crying, apologizing, rewriting history. "We did what we thought was best," my mother said. "You were young. You wouldn't understand." Then came anger. My father accused me of manipulation. You were turned against us, he said. Finally came desperation. They asked for financial help, not gifts, loans, they called them. That's when I made my move. I didn't reject them. I offered them employment, temporary positions, clear contracts, no ownership, no control. They would work under the company they once thought they deserved. Under me. Every morning, they checked in. Every decision required approval. Every mistake was documented. I treated them professionally, never cruel, never emotional. That was the hardest part for them. There was no explosion, no shouting, no dramatic revenge. Just structure. One evening my father stayed behind after a meeting. The office was quiet, lights dimmed. He looked older. Smaller. Why are you doing this? He asked quietly. Why not just walk away? I considered the question carefully. Because walking away is what you did, I said. I learned from you. He had no answer. Months passed. My siblings eventually left, unable to handle the pressure. My parents stayed. Not because they wanted to, but because they needed to. They learned what it felt like to be replaceable. One day, my mother asked if I hated them. I shook my head. No, I said. Hate would mean you still have power over me. The truth was simple. I didn't destroy them. I didn't expose them publicly. I didn't take revenge the way movies show. I did something quieter. I built a life so solid that their absence no longer mattered. In the end, I released them from their contracts. Not as punishment, but as closure. I gave them just enough to survive, nothing more. As they left my office for the last time, my mother turned back and said, I wish we had never left you. I met her eyes and replied calmly, if you hadn't, I wouldn't be who I am. That was the final truth. They lost a child, I gained a future. And the greatest revenge wasn't control or punishment. It was becoming everything they never believed I could be. My parents abandoned me at 13. 15 years later, they worked for me,